prescription for caregivers. Take care of yourself. A presentation by Wendy Lustbader, MSW.
How many of you are taking care of a spouse or a partner? Okay. How many are taking care of a mother or a father? Wow. How many of you have ever been disabled, helpless, laying in a hospital bed besides me? Okay. What is so hard about being dependent? Let's start with that question and get right to the heart of the matter. What is so hard about receiving help?
Feeling humiliated because you become a burden to other people.
He said humiliated because you become a burden to other people. My humiliation astonished me. I wouldn't ask for help at all. Finally, a friend said, "Wendy, how are you getting any groceries?" And she starts flinging open my cabinet, and they were bare. And she said, "Let me go to the store for you." But there's this sense of not wanting to burden busy people. She went to the store and came back with a bunch of stuff. I had given her a list. And she bought me the wrong oatmeal. She bought Safeway instead of Quaker Oats. And I bit her head off. "You bought the wrong oatmeal!" And I thought, what's wrong here? I'm not this kind of person to snap at somebody. It was loss of control, loss of perspective, helplessness, and just this general rage that I couldn't do for myself. Yes.
Another one is loss of dignity.
Loss of dignity. Thank you. Your dignity just evaporates. You start to feel like a body because people relate to you as a body. What else?
Resentment.
Resentment. A woman didn't go to church anymore on Sundays, and I said to her, "There's all these good people in your church. How come you won't take any rides?" She said, "Because I resent having to ask for a ride to church. I hate having to ask. Why don't these good people know that it's demeaning to ask? Why doesn't someone call me up and say, 'I'll be there at 10 on Sunday'?" And then she said one person who did give her a ride, when he finally got there, he went on for 10 minutes about all the traffic he had to go through in order to get to her house. And that was her last ride to church. We have to look at the delicate exchanges going on when one person accepts mercy from another. The quality of mercy is a very fragile exchange between two people.
Anger.
Anger. I was waiting for anger. You're angry at your stroke. You're angry at your Parkinson's disease. Who are you going to take it out on? Your caregivers. I'm sitting in front of a room of targets for anger. Because anger finds the nearest safe outpost to be dumped on. And you'll say to yourself, well, why does someone yell at, bite the hand that feeds them? Why are they yelling at the person whose goodwill they need the most? Well, you're there. And some people can't yell at God effectively enough. Or they don't feel a sense of someone to yell at, so they yell at you. Thanks for bringing up anger. What else?
Love.
Love, okay. Actually, it's good to bring up love. I know people who are so worried about you, the caregiver, that they hide from you. They don't want you to know that they urinated in their bed last night. There was a lady that would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, strip her bed, she was 85 years old, carry her bedding down to the basement at great peril to herself, wash all of her clothes, because she didn't want her daughter to do her laundry. Her daughter was working full time. So there is something about love going on in here. And we could say, "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were having this kind of trouble? I could have helped you." But that was her act of love to try to conceal. Thank you. What else? Someone else? Yes.
Fear.
Fear. You're afraid of the future. In some cases, you're afraid of the past. You're afraid of things getting worse. Sometimes you're afraid of them getting better temporarily, because that might get your hopes up. And then some diseases like MS get better, and then they get worse. Thank you. Fear is a primary emotion. You guys are getting almost everything on my card. What else? There's still a few more. Yeah.
Possible adjustment in income.
Money. We have to talk about money. We talked about death. I think we have to talk about money. I think Woody Allen should do a movie called Money and Death. I could just see the whole script. You are worried about money. There was a lady who wouldn't change her husband's incontinent pads. She used the Seattle Times instead of buying Chucks. And it looked like, she was a pretty abusive lady. Why wouldn't she buy, the right materials? She lived in a nice house. Some of us felt a little hostile towards her. Finally, I said to her, gee, why don't you buy these Chucks? The Seattle Times is putting acid into his bed sore. And she said, you listen to me, lady. This man, my husband over there, could have picked two kinds of pension. One pension ends when he dies. The other kind of pension, you get a little bit less, but it goes on till the wife dies. What do you think he picked? He picked the one that's going to end when he goes. I'm worried about my own future. I'm not going to have enough to live on. I think this is a legitimate worry that we don't always recognize in caregivers. Worried about their own private future. Who are they going to talk to about this particular worry? Money is a big concern. What else? Any others come to mind? What about boredom? It is so boring to be sick. One lady said, I am sick of my sick self. I thought that was a beautiful expression, sick of my sick self. I asked one lady who was just haggard looking and her eyes were kind of blank. Her memory seemed very fuzzy, and I said, what would make life worth living for you? She said, I'm glad you asked that. And she scratched her head. She said, Burger King. And I said, wait a minute, what do you mean? I said, what would make life worth living? She said, Burger King. She said, those meals on wheels, they're so healthy. There's no salt, there's no fat, there's just nothing exciting. I can't even eat anymore. I'm so bored. That's why I'm losing weight. I'm bored. And to get out of the house once a week would be such a miracle, to be part of the human race. A light went off in my brain. I called Catholic Community Services, where they have parish coordinators and volunteers. They found me a lady who wanted to go to Burger King. So she'd pick up my frail client, and they'd go out, and every Wednesday they just pig out together, the two of them, French fries and hamburgers. I made a repeat visit on this person about a month later. And she said, oh, I know what day it is, Wendy. It's Monday. It's 2 days before Burger Day. I think sometimes we think people have dementia who are just so bored. One day blurs into the next. And they have nothing to live for. We're going to talk later about how do you make life better for the caregiver and for the dependent person. And that's one of the essential wisdoms, is something to live for, to look forward to. Even if it's a big plate of grease. Any others you want to add? Yes?
Finding resources.
Finding resources. That kind of flips us over. Let's go ahead and flip it over to the other side. What is so hard about giving care? And if you think of some more for the receiving care, we'll throw them into the pile. One of the things so hard about giving care is finding resources. I hope today that you'll talk to lots of people in this room and find out about resources. What else is so hard about giving care?
Socializing.
Socializing, having people in your life. Caregivers are some of the most isolated people. It's not because caregivers don't have friends. I'm not trying to say anything like that. But very few people understand what it's like to be a caregiver unless they've been one. I know a woman who has an army of friends, but she feels very alone in the world because nobody really gets what it's like 24 hours a day to minister to her husband, who's almost totally paralyzed. Yes.
Well, friends do tend to drop away, I think, because you're not available to respond to their requests
Thank
or
you.
their invitations.
He said friends do tend to drop away.
They feel vulnerable.
They feel vulnerable, and you're not available to respond to them in the way that you might have in the past. My grandmother was taking care of my grandfather as he died very slowly of Alzheimer's disease. She said her friends vanished. Yes, they would call on the phone. How are you, Dottie? But nobody wanted to come over and see my grandfather in his Alzheimer's condition. People just vanished. I had a grown son who wouldn't help his sister out at all with the care of their mother, and it was causing incredible strife between the two. I said to the brother, why don't you come over? Your sister's ready to drop of exhaustion. And he said, Wendy, I just can't stand to look at my mother in that bed like that. My mother's always been my best friend. It just makes me want to cry. I said, what about mowing your sister's lawn? What about taking her son to daycare? He goes, okay. Just don't make me go in the house and see my mother. You're very right to bring that up. Yes, sir.
Perhaps the finding for some of us the time to give enough to those people and the guilt associated with it because we don't have the time from our own life.
Thank you. Finding time enough to give. Guilt is going to be a big part of the second half of this lecture after we take our break, because I think guilt is endless. There's as many varieties of guilt as there are people in this room. You're guilty if you go out to dinner and have a good time and forget about caregiving. You say, what right do I have to enjoy this beautiful meal when my loved one is stuck at home? I knew a wife who wouldn't make herself good food anymore. She was a wonderful cook. She said, oh, since Charlie's been on the feeding tube, I have no heart for eating. And I sit next to my husband and I have a TV dinner. I pour the mush down his feeding tube, and then I eat my TV dinner and I say, hey, Charlie, you're not missing a thing.
Yeah. Sometimes the caregiver is wondering whether or not this is the way she is also going to end up and the burden she's going to be to her kids.
Excellent. She said, sometimes the caregiver's thinking, God, what if this is me? 20 years, 30 years from now, this could be me. What am I going to hand on to my children? And some of the not so nice feelings that you feel, you imagine someone else feeling about you someday. And it's hair-raising, it's chilling. And that's part of why we're here today, because I will give you some wisdoms on how to make some of that better. Thank you for mentioning it. Yes?
Yeah, I think of guilt where you've lost that relationship that you had where there was sharing and you're always giving, and sometimes you go, why don't they give back anymore? And you just get tired of always kind of being on for the person.
You lose the relationship you had before with the person where there was some mutuality of giving, sharing.
Yeah.
And you say, God, I'm just so tired of being the one to fork out all the giving here. I heard an incredible remark on an airplane. I was working on a lecture and didn't want to talk to the people next to me, so I just was very unfriendly. So the woman turned to the person on her other side and started telling her life story to the man. You know how people do that on airplanes? And it was very interesting. So I just started to get involved in it. But I pretended not to be eavesdropping. And she said to the man next to her, when I was 45 years old, my husband was the same age, he fell off the roof when he was getting leaves out of the gutters. He became a quadriplegic in one moment. My entire life changed. And she said to the man, it was as if I had to divorce him in my mind and marry him again on new terms, which I thought was a perfectly eloquent. There I was, writing it down. It was very moving. There are some deep changes in roles and in the relationship and who that person is to you. With Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, it's all the more pronounced. It's as if the person has already died, but there's no funeral. There's no public place to vent your grief. I felt this very deeply while my grandfather was disappearing from us by inches. And where was the time to grieve? In fact, we thought that we were all depressed in my family, but we were grieving. I think that's a better name for it when someone's slowly slipping away from you. This is also true in other types of illnesses. It helps to call it grief. What else? Yes.
There's the whole area of care that has to do with, somewhat with guilt, but has to do with, am I doing the right things for him?
That's good. Am I doing the right things? You make me think of a lady whose husband couldn't get his arm in his shirt. He had a stroke and he was very grumpy about it, and he'd try and try and try, so she'd go over and say, "Here, honey, let me put that on. Get away!" And then she'd back off, and then he'd go, "Why aren't you helping me?" So she was yelled at if she helped him. She was yelled at if she didn't help him. Right. I couldn't say that, no. Anyway, finally she thought of an idea. She'd sit there and do her knitting, right? About 3 feet away from her husband, acting like she just happened to be sitting there. And he'd struggle to get his arm in the shirt sleeve and struggle, and she got a feel for when he had enough. Sometimes he'd just start cursing, and that was her cue. And then she'd get up and gently put his arm in the sleeve. It's such a delicate line. Am I doing too much for this person? Am I doing too little? Am I babying them? Am I promoting independence? Sometimes it's just easier to do it for them. That's a heck of a dilemma. What if it takes 5 minutes to do something for somebody and an hour to let them struggle and help you? Do you deprive them of this chance to get some rehabilitation, or do you just, you're so busy? What else? Yes.
Humor, you better find humor in all the situations, even if it is sick humor, because it is so sad and tragic, it is
Thank you.
hilarious.
That's excellent. Thank you. That's good support for my... I survive on laughing when things are very tragic. It's because my heart aches so deeply that I have to find the humor. And I urge all of you to think about the humor in some of the situations. I've got one to tell you about. My grandmother couldn't bathe my grandfather anymore. He just started hitting her. You know, when she tried to get him into the bathroom, he just said, "Get away from me." And he wouldn't shave anymore. I think he was afraid she was going to cut his throat. No. Anyway, he had this shaggy face, and he smelled, and it was this horrible thing. I said, "Grandma, please hire somebody. Sometimes people will do for a stranger what they won't do for you." And isn't that annoying? But anyway, in walks this gorgeous home health aide. And my grandfather, who's always been one for the ladies, looked at her and said, "Hello." And he, you know, gallantly takes her arm and struts into the bathroom, and the door closes. My grandmother was furious. And she's pacing outside that bathroom, and you hear the water on, you even hear singing. He comes out a half hour later, smelling like a rose, cleanly shaven, smiling. Now, my grandfather went on with that routine for about a year before we finally had to put him in a nursing home. He's been gone now 5 years. My grandmother still wonders what went on in that bathroom. She wants to know. But we love to tease her about it.
One more.
Yes.
You mentioned that crying when you need to.
Crying when you need to. Thank you. Crying almost seems like a luxury when you have no time and you're not the one in the wheelchair or you're not the one in the bed. I think crying, no matter what your culture, no matter how foreign it is to you, is healthy. It does something to take pain and get it off your chest. The best kind of crying occurs in the presence of someone else. For some reason, crying with a witness takes the pain out of us more thoroughly than crying alone. Why is that? I don't know. It's how we're built. So feel free to cry. I'll start crying if you all do. But some of the stories I'll tell you today are very powerful, and it's okay to cry. And it's okay to cry back in your own house. Yes?
Around humor, my dad in his mental condition will say one-liners that you'd only hear in a movie. And my brother and I will just crack up over it.
Thank you. His dad says one-liners that you'd never even hear in a bad X-rated movie, probably. But some people will come out with unbelievable comments, and it's wonderful to laugh.
The other half of that is that we'll laugh about it, but they'll think I'm making fun of a situation that is out of his control, and so I feel a certain amount of guilt.
Thank you. He said he feels guilty when he laughs with this person making the one-liners. If you watch the face of someone who has dementia and they say something hysterically funny and you all laugh, they feel like they cracked a good joke. Often you just watch, it's ethical and okay if you watch the face of the person. Usually they just feel wonderful that they made you laugh. I thought of another one someone told me. Now she didn't think this was funny, all right? So I had to keep the laugh in for about a half hour and wait till I went to the bathroom. This lady told me that she had Alzheimer's disease. And she says, I know I've got it. I've got that old-timer's disease. She'd seen too many specials on TV. And I said, how do you know you have old-timer's disease? She says, well, don't tell my daughter. Don't tell anybody. I said, okay, what is it? She said, well, I was watching TV one day, and I was balancing my checkbook, and the TV kept flashing. She thought her TV channel changer was a calculator. And nothing added up. Nothing. She says, that's it. And without any humor, she said, I have Alzheimer's disease. And this laugh inside me. I had to do deep breathing, think about that, because I could just see her flashing the TV. I think laughter is like medicine. If we don't laugh at some of this stuff, laughter and crying are just cousins of each other. And I'm one of these people, if you really get me going, I'll start weeping while I laugh. And that's when it comes the full circle. And that might happen today. And it's happened to me in front of groups where I was just weeping with laughter. So we'll see how far to the outer edges we go. Okay. Anything else you want to mention? Yes.
What about the tendency to withdraw and put up walls and think of negative things only so that you won't be hurt when your loved one dies?
Wow, that's a good one. She said the tendency to just focus on the negative, put up walls, and in a sense, part with the person before they've parted from you. No one's ever said that out loud in a group. Thank you. There can be a kind of anticipatory letting go of someone where the ill person becomes more and more alone. They also withdraw from you sometimes. You've seen this. Some people just get more and more remote. I don't think there's anything we can do about something that has such emotional pull. It's sometimes possible to step across that gap and say to someone who's pulled away from you, would you like to talk about what's on your mind, or do you want to be on your own here? And some people will appreciate being given the choice. When it's inside yourself, sometimes it helps to talk to another caregiver. I have to mention that right at the outset here. The best people to talk to are others in the same shoes. Those of you who have never been to a support group, even if you're not a joiner, even if that's the most foreign thing to you, please think about a support group, because other people can give you incredible wisdom. Example, I did a caregiver workshop in a shopping mall. Can you believe this? It was amazing, and all these people showed up, and a woman in a three-piece business suit, looking about 70 years old, with gorgeously, adorned hair. She stands up in front of everyone and says, I'm here today because I want people to know that I started hitting my husband. And I had to get help. I was so frustrated that somebody like me who never hit anybody in her life started hitting someone. And she said, my husband's been gone a few years now, but I go to caregiver workshops to let other people know it can happen to anybody. And I admired her courage so enormously. Rough handling, we see things about elder abuse in the newspapers as if it's some maniac that does it. We're all capable of any kind of abuse if you put us under enough pressure. And finally, weight gain and weight loss. Boy, some people Just take to the refrigerator when they're stressed. And you will see caregivers gaining weight, and you'll see some caregivers getting very skinny because they lose heart for eating. Anyway, some people are going to say every one of those things is true for me. Well, you're in the right place today, and I'm glad that you came. Let's just enumerate all the different kinds of guilt. Let's just get our guilt on the table. All right. One of them is at verbally abusing somebody. What's another kind of guilt? Anyone want to? Yes.
Guilt about offending someone's dignity.
Yes.
That was
Offending someone's dignity. I had a son who just couldn't stand to bathe his mother. He was the only one left in the family to help her, and he hated to hurt her dignity. And he said, "Wendy, you won't believe what you can do with towels." And he developed this routine. It took about 7 towels where he could bathe his mother without seeing her nakedness. I'd love to get that on video. Wouldn't that be something? The towel bath that preserves dignity. But you feel very guilty if you have to violate dignity. One son said to his dad, "Please accept a bath aide to come in and help you. Please, Dad. I just can't, worry about you all the time. You're going to fall in the bathtub." And he just prevailed upon his dad. He felt so guilty about it. His dad finally said, "Okay." About a month later, the son says, "Dad, how's it going having that lady bathe you?" He goes, "No problem. I keep on my underwear." And I love picturing the boxer shorts floating in the water, It's just a great image.
What's a good way to wash these underwear?
Good way to wash his underwear. So here was the son feeling so guilty that he made his father lose his dignity. No way did his father lose his dignity. I love that one. Other kinds of guilt, yes.
Oh, it's nothing.
Oh, it's nothing. Do you want to expand on that?
It's just that you know something's wrong and you try to ask about it and you know that you've done everything and you still say, "Oh, it's nothing."
That's good, that's good. You know something's wrong with the person you're caring for and they keep saying, "Oh, it's nothing." And then there's the guilt when you desist from trying to find it out because you had enough of it already or you wish they'd just come out with it. Yeah, that's a good one. There's a transaction there, yes.
How about the guilt you feel, say one spouse feels towards another by having that spouse helping with your parent?
Oh, that's good.
Like you're dumping a load on your spouse. Even though you have a load on yourself, you're also dumping it on someone else
that's
and
good.
you don't.
Let's say it's your mother who's taken ill and you want your husband to bear with you're not coming home for dinner 2 nights a week because you're making her dinner or asking him to give her rides to the senior center. There's the guilt of feeling that you're dumping on your spouse. That's a good one. You had one.
Well, this is a little bit confusing. My husband's now on a catheter, and I have had to be trained to put the catheter in and take it out.
Her
And
husband's
he's-
now on a catheter, and she's had to be trained on putting it in and taking it out.
He's constantly getting infections, and I keep thinking, it's me, I'm not doing it right, and now he has infections, and he's never had them before.
Thank you. She said, now he's getting all these infections, and she says to herself, is it me? Am I not doing it right? Is there something corroded in my care? When really people who have catheters get infections. I could tell you that 1,000,000 times in a
And
row.
I can hear it 1,000,000 times.
But you'll still
I
feel
don't hear
guilty.
it.
Right. There's something about guilt. It has amazing staying power, doesn't it? It does. Because you just feel somebody else could do it better. You have one.
You also feel very guilty even though you don't express it because you've got all your thoughts, these hateful thoughts. I wish you'd be quiet for a few minutes and give me a few minutes peace. You don't say anything. You outwardly, it's all fine, but you keep it all that, and you feel guilty for having those evil thoughts.
Excellent. That's right on my list. I have that in capital letters. Guilty because you're thinking things. If somebody put a TV camera on your brain, it would be terrible. Bob Dylan has a song where he says, if my thought dreams could be seen, they'd put my head in a guillotine. And I love that line. And the things that you can feel under the captivity of caregiving are truly shocking. And I think one feels terrible even to remember the things that you thought. I appreciate that very much. Someone else was waiting. Yes.
The guilt of long-distance care, not being there living across the country.
Yes, boy, do I know that one. The guilt of living 3,000 miles away from the person you're trying to help. Long-distance caregivers have tons of guilt because when we come and visit, we want everything to be accomplished because we're giving up our vacation time. Now, some of you are being visited by out-of-town relatives. Isn't it a nightmare? Because people like me come and visit, and we want to get a chore worker out there. We want to get a visiting nurse. We want to redeem our vacation time, right? We want to get things done. When I used to see an out-of-town caregiver coming, when I was a social worker in a hospital, I would duck under a desk so they wouldn't find me because of that urgency. When my turn came, when I went to get my grandmother on Medicaid in New York City, you should have seen me with that social worker. She tried to hide, and I ran after her. And I said, let's get the coupon thing filled out. Let's get this done. And she just waited for me to go home, like I waited for other people. Another problem in families is the phenomenon of the ill person reviving when the out-of-town relative shows up. Isn't that amazing? How all of a sudden someone with advanced memory loss can recite the Declaration of Independence just because their beloved son from Oklahoma landed at the airport. And that causes terrible enmity within families. You told me Dad was bad off. Look at him, he's great. How do you explain that he revived because of the stimulation of seeing the long-lost Harvey? And Harvey's going to scream at his brother, you're babying Dad. You didn't tell me the truth. And worse, all you do is complain about how hard it is to care for Dad. Dad's great. Not only has Dad revived, but he's charming to the out-of-town visitor. And he says, thank you. How come we never hear that word? How come the word thank you is hardly ever spoken within the relationship of caregiver and care receiver? Does anyone have a theory? I finally have an idea about it after years of thinking about it. I think that to say thank you to you, the people doing the work, is so painful because I have to admit to myself how much you're doing for me. Not only do I have to admit it, but I have to see it. I have to feel it. And I'm so terrified of what a burden I've become that to thank you is to acknowledge my status as burden, and so I don't say thank you. Now that's my theory. Yes.
This isn't guilt, but
that's all right.
Hostility, when you talk about relatives, hostility towards other family members who do not help out a little bit.
Good. Hostility towards the other folks in the family that aren't lifting a finger. And that's even worse, she said, and when they know everything, not only do they not help, but they tell you how to do it when they come over. Yeah, that's a double barrel. Yes.
Well, I have a real guilt cycle going because I feel guilty because I have other people that need me. I have a young son and a husband, and I feel guilty when I don't give them enough time, and yet when I do, I feel guilty because I'm not giving it to my grandmother. So
whoa.
It's like, you know.
Very good. I'm going to repeat that to be sure everyone heard it. She feels guilty about other people in her life who are dependent on her. Most of us, many of us, don't just have an elder or older person we're concerned about. We might have kids that need our help, or a friend or a spouse. So you feel pulled in so many directions. If you give to one, it feels like you don't have much to give to the other. Someone in your position can walk between 17 varieties of guilt all day long because it feels like everywhere you turn you're guilty. Thank you for mentioning that. But what you see in families, and this will tie everything together we've just been saying, is here's a woman in her 80s and her son comes over. And they sit in the living room and have a nice talk. The daughter shows up and she says, oh, Julie, would you vacuum the living room? Hey, Billy's been here for an hour. Why didn't he pick up the vacuum cleaner? And it's the older mother who's wanting the daughter to do the work and the son to do the talking. And that leaves a sister in a position of rage and hostility towards a brother. Or the more glamorous thing may be to take mom out to dinner while the sister is washing the urine-soaked sheets and cleaning the toilet. So who does what and what's women's work and what's men's work is a big pressure. I'd like to move on and go to some more topics. I want to go from guilt right into resentment and tell you a story about resentment that so illustrates what I want to say today about making things better. There was a daughter whose father was so lonely after his wife died, after her mother died. Every single night, right at bedtime, just when she was finally getting into bed with her husband and it was their intimate time, the phone would ring. And it was her dad saying, "Oh God, I miss Mom so much. I'm feeling so lonely." Night after night, just as she sunk into the pillows, the phone would ring. And she said, "I grew to hate the sound of my father's voice." And that kind of hatred can make you feel so guilty. This is a dad who she always adored. So I said to her, "Why don't you tell him?" And she said, "Tell him? You know, my father's so lonely. I don't want to tell him." I said, "Are you resenting your father tremendously?" She said, "Oh, it's terrible." I said, "Resentment is poison. And don't think that your father doesn't feel the resentment in your voice." And that was something she hadn't thought about. She thought that she was covering it up. I asked her to try telling the truth. Tell you what happened. She said, "Dad, I hate to tell you this, but when you call just as I'm getting into bed at night with Fred, it's just horrible. And I just can't stand it. I just dread it when you call." The dad says, "Oh my God, I'm such a dumb cup." He said, "That's the reason I'm missing Mom at that time of day is because that was our most intimate time, and that's when I'm the loneliest. How come I didn't think about you? Oh my God." He said, "Thank you for telling me." And then he says, "Why don't you make a tape that I could play 10 o'clock every night? I'll turn it on. It'll be the sound of your voice talking of memories of Mom." He thought of a great suggestion. She made him an incredible tape, which he would just play. And he said, "God, I'm just so glad you told me. I'd hate to interrupt your intimacy." And she said, "You know, it's true, Dad. You're the guy that taught me what it is to have a good marriage." And it was just a wonderful example of resentment being something you should do something about. Here's an image I can give you. If you think about the things that you resent, resentment is a line that kind of cuts across your stomach. When you feel yourself crossing that line, you're doing too much. You are doing too much or sacrificing too much. It is our duty to stop before we cross the line of resentment, because we're then poisoning the relationship with the person. This concept has helped me tremendously in not over-giving or over-sacrificing. And what do you do at those hard moments? When in doubt, speak the truth. When you don't know what else to do, try the truth, just like that daughter did. It's kind of astonishing. Doesn't always work, but it may be your best option. Okay. The other worst thing to do is compare yourself to other caregivers. A lady went to the nursing home to visit her mom. And the mom said to her, "Mrs. Silverstein's daughter comes 4 times a week." Well, Mrs. Silverstein's daughter is not you. And maybe you are giving up to the limit of your resentment. And nobody can tell another person how much to give. This is an entirely private decision. And now I have to switch to the antidote to resentment. It's the concept of a Sabbath. The concept of a Sabbath is as old as time. I mean, we don't know how many generations this concept goes back. That one day should be different from the rest. That I should have a self that's separate from the work that I do. If everybody in this room can think to yourselves, what's something you love to do that you haven't done in weeks? You could do this on a piece of paper or do it in your mind. Think of 5 things you love to do that don't cost any money. And think about the last time you did those things. Let me tell you what some caregivers told me. One of them said, "God, I'd give everything I have for a hot bath with nobody screaming at me, just to soak." Another one said, 75 years old, taking care of her husband. I like to go up in the attic and read filthy books. And just lay there and go into these romance novels. The trashier, the better. And leave the world of caregiving. Just leave it behind. But he's always calling for me. I need some uninterrupted time. One person said, I'd like to talk on the phone to a friend without having him pick up the extension. My grandfather used to pick up the extension. He was afraid they were talking about him. They were. I'll tell you the woman who taught this concept to me. She asked me to tell this story to every caregiver I meet, and I'm going to follow that promise. She had a husband who had Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. He was in the advanced stages of this disease. He could barely lift his head. He was in a wheelchair and could barely talk, and he had drool coming down. He was in very bad condition. Day after day after day, 7 days a week, she took care of him. And I said, why don't you go out? She goes, oh, I can't spend the money on help. She had $50,000 in the bank, but she was worrying about her own future, afraid. And I said, what if I find you someone for $5 an hour? Please don't get me arrested here, but there are some people who will work for cash on the barrelhead, who don't want to report their earnings. And I did know someone like that, even though I'm not supposed to do this. But anyway, I found someone for $5 an hour. And she says, all right, I can afford it, but what do I do? It's possible to become so imprisoned as a caregiver, you forget what it is to have a life. You forget what it was you used to do. So I said, what did you used to do that made life worth living? She says, I used to be a member of a walking club. And we'd all meet at Winchell's Donut Shop, and then we'd walk the lake. And when it rained, we ate donuts. That's my walking club. And in Seattle, that's a lot of donuts. Anyway, she says, we'd all get together, we'd walk the lake, and it would just be so wonderful. I said, so call them up. She goes, well, it's been years. I said, maybe they still meet. Sure enough, they were. She said, oh, no, I can't do it. Anyone guess why? Guilt. I'll feel so guilty. My husband can't communicate well, and it will be horrible for him to be with a stranger. I walked right into that bedroom. This is one of the hardest things I've done as a social worker. I sat at eye level to the man in the wheelchair, and I said, sir, your wife is very tired, and she's totally dedicated to you, but she needs a break. I need to ask you to give her something. Could you give your wife a break? Could you order her out of here? I want you to kick her out. Just tell her she has to go walk the lake 3 times a week for 2 hours. Would you boot her out of here, sir? And he went like this. I put it in terms of him giving something to her. One of the worst things about disability is you have nothing to give to anybody. And I think people need the concept that by granting respite, they are giving something, by stifling their complaint. I said to the man, it's not going to be easy for you. You're not going to know this lady. You can't communicate with her. You're going to be frightened. Thank you so much. What a gift to your wife. She comes in there. She couldn't believe. He said yes. Well, he loved her. Somebody mentioned love. Anyway, we got the worker. She started walking the lake, and I came back to see her a month later. I'll never forget walking in that house. Her face was totally different. The lines in her face had opened up. She said, you get right in here, Wendy, and you sit down, and I want to tell you something, and I want you to tell every caregiver you ever meet what happened to me. She said it was a misty morning. I was with the ladies again. We went out by the lake, and I remembered what it is to be alive. She said, some people pray in a church, some pray in a synagogue. For me, it's the beauty of the world that calls me back to myself. And when I saw that lake again, I remembered the rest of my life. I remembered who I am. When I got back home, I couldn't wait to see my husband. And I kissed him on the lips for the first time in 5 years because I was glad to see him. And I was thinking, he got a great deal.
He got a reward.
He got a great deal. He gave his wife something, and he got his wife happy to see him. So those of you who have people in your care who are very reluctant, who make you feel very guilty, or you make yourself feel very guilty when you take a break, think about the notion of a Sabbath, of getting away, because it's only in getting away we remember who we are. That's the very meaning of the concept of perspective. I don't care if it's reading dirty books in your attic or garage sales. One lady watches sports on TV. She likes a good basketball game. The requirement of rest is that it get you away psychologically from the grueling aspects of giving care. And who's going to benefit? The person in your care is going to benefit. Okay. There's so many reasons why you can't leave someone with someone else. Let me just read you some of the traps, and then I'm going to get near the conclusion. Reasons why you can't leave someone with someone else. It costs too much money. It's not worth the trouble of finding someone. Any others?
They won't like it.
They won't like it. There it is. They won't do it right. Nobody can do the care of Harry the way I do the care. And I tell you that's true. But you don't have to have a perfect job done every day. What really is more important is not that Harry's incontinent pad is fastened on correctly, but that you are spiritually able to go on. Anyone else have?
Something might happen to him
Yes.
or her while I'm gone.
Everybody feels that way. I know when I finally go and take a break, he's probably going to fall while I'm gone, or he'll die while I'm gone. Everybody in this room feels that way. It seems to be an irresistible notion. Yes?
There's that having a stranger in your home,
Yes.
someone you don't know.
Someone's going to case the joint and maybe rob me, could be a fear. One lady in a small town said, "Oh no, I don't want any worker coming in. She'll blab my business all over the town." And in fact, in small towns, that's a concern. Yes. I still maintain, even if it costs money and it means having a stranger come in, and even if someone doesn't like it, to take care of yourself is to take care of the person who needs your care. That's really my message today. My most important message is taking care of the caregiver takes care of the care receiver. Anyone else have any other reluctance they want to confess?
Not a reluctance, it's just a point I'd like to make. The person giving care to a family member, if you have a lot of other family members, maybe they don't help at all, but they're kind of like watching this other person's funds. I mean, wondering where is the money disappearing to, even though you're bringing in caregivers and you're spending it on depends or whatever, you know.
Thank you. A lot of people have their eye on that inheritance. You know, where is that money going to go? Really. And if you have to cut a piece of paper out of one of my books and send it to them, I mean, I know people that have cut the paragraph out that says, listen, if I don't rest, I can't be a good caregiver. I am spending our parents' money on their endurance at home. Which brings me to the very important point. Nursing home placement. Nobody likes to say those words. Nursing home. In a case with siblings, you can say to siblings, you know, by keeping mom at home, I am saving the estate thousands of dollars of cashing in the house. You should support me. And you should be very happy I'm spending the money on some home care when I could be cashing in the house. Very important point. Secondly, nursing home placement is not the end of caregiving. I can't leave today without telling you that the care can continue in the nursing home. There was a mother and daughter who never had time for each other anymore. The mom was so disabled, they never could talk about anything but the disability and the stroke and the catheters. After she put her mom in the nursing home, they had a relationship again. I witnessed this mother and daughter having soulful conversations again, as they always had, because the nursing home did all the drudgery and they were finally left with a relationship. I've seen this between husbands and wives. This is not the popular notion, but I've witnessed this in my own life. My grandmother finally put my grandfather in the nursing home when she just couldn't handle him. She went 3 times a week so faithfully that the staff were terrified of her. Imagine my grandmother coming down the hallway. If he wasn't perfectly attired and well kept, she would raise Cain, and everybody knew it. Studies are showing that visited people in nursing homes get the best care. There is a role for families in nursing homes, and that's called showing up. Showing up is a profoundly difficult thing to do. Nursing homes are not easy places to be. And I'm going to end today with a story that takes place in a nursing home.
Could you touch on a decision of when a person should decide to put someone
Thank
in a
you.
nursing home?
You're going to think he's an audience plant. He just keeps asking the right question at the right moment. That's what I wanted to get to. You can just leave that. I want to give you the red flags for nursing home placement. These are situations that mean it's time for you to start thinking about it. You don't have to be terrified of bringing this up with the person, because you can bring it up in the language of preserving the relationship. It's abandonment that people fear. They're not afraid of where the care is taking place, but that they'll be abandoned. If you make that distinction, you'll have a lot more heart and courage for the truth. If you're really not interested in abandonment, but the physical care is too much, talk about your dedication and your commitment and changing the location of care. Number 1, no sleep for the caregiver. If a caregiver is getting interrupted sleep day after day after day, that has to be remedied. Otherwise, people get sleep deprivation, and it's almost impossible to be even a decent caregiver. Has anyone ever tried to hire someone to spend the night? It costs a fortune, and it's very hard to find. Number 2, the person's too heavy for lifting. Sometimes very tiny people have to take care of very huge people. You should first of all have a physical therapist teach you techniques of transferring so you don't hurt your back. But sometimes even with the most amazing training and even some lifting equipment, it's too hard. Number 3 is Alzheimer's. It's very hard to go all the way to the end with Alzheimer's disease. The end of the person's life often takes place in a nursing home. But once again, the caregiving doesn't end with the nursing home placement. I always urge people to find a place that's close by the person that's willing to visit, because that's what counts. And number 4 is other outside stresses of major proportions. If you're an adult daughter taking care of a mom, taking care of teenage kids, if you're in the middle of a divorce, how much stress can one person take? I think that there are sometimes external stresses in a caregiver's life which mean you just can't handle it. It's too much. A closing note on that. Nursing homes, everybody thinks, are permanent places where somebody goes. There's a movement afoot of putting people in nursing homes temporarily, where you put someone in for a few weeks and you finally take a vacation. It's an expensive option, but those of you who might be able to afford it, think about the possibility of a short-term placement. I have 2 more stories to tell you that summarize today. The first one is about giving back control. One of the things that drives ill people crazy is losing control, and I want to tell you a fantastic story on that. A man couldn't speak. He had a stroke where he had terrible aphasia, and he spoke like this. And we'd go up to him and we'd say, "Sir, we just can't understand you." And he'd say, and he was so frustrated because no one could understand him, but he could understand himself. It was so depressed in that house, and there was the wife with her arms folded, just so frustrated. So I said to the man, "Is there something I could do for you? I'm going to sit here until I understand at least one thing I could do for you to make life better." And the man said, "Run, and run. Any ideas? I said, "Sir, I just don't know what you're saying. What can we do for you to make life better?" He said, "Run, points to his wife.
I go to the bathroom.
Want to go to the bathroom? I tried everything. Finally, it came to me. What does a man keep in his hip pocket? His wallet. And I said, sir, you want your wallet? He goes, run, 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 run. He points to his wife. I said, ma'am, where's his wallet? She goes, well, I took it away. He doesn't need it anymore. He can't go anywhere. He can't drive. You know, what can he do? He doesn't need a wallet. I said, ma'am, could you go get his wallet? And he goes, run, run, run. She goes and gets the wallet and brings it back and hands it to me. He goes, rah, rah. And I said, could you give him a few dollars? And he goes, rah, rah, rah. And I asked her, is there a store nearby where he could go and get you a quart of milk? She says, he can't go shopping. I said, anyway, this man started going to the store and getting a quart of milk for her, a loaf of bread. I came back to that house. I'll never forget. He runs out of his house, down the lawn, flings open my door. I felt like a princess. He bows, escorts me back into the house with a big grin. And he goes, we mustn't overlook the power of small changes. I want to send you home today with the symbolic ideas. Sometimes you give something small back to someone, but you're giving the world back to them. I told that story at the Parkinson's Disease Association annual workshop several years ago, and a line of women were waiting at the end. And one came up and said, I can't wait to go home and give my father his wallet back. And then the next lady said, I can't wait to get home and give my husband his wallet back. 7 wallets went back in one day. And today some wallets and purses will be returned. I want to close with a personal story. I had a friend living in a nursing home. This is a story about guilt and resentment, and it makes a perfect ending for today. She was 101 years old when she died, but when I met her, she was 98, and as giving and as generous as could be. It was a friendship of mutuality. I would visit her every Saturday, and we would drink a little cognac together in a tiny little glass, and she loved getting away with it. Because in the nursing home it wasn't permitted, and she would hide it in the closet. And we had this wonderful ritual. She'd go get the stuff, and I'd go to the closet, take out the wine or whatever, and then we'd shut the door and have our little, contraband together. I also brought her salty potato chips and ice cream, because these are scarcities in nursing homes. Anyway, every Saturday I went, and it was a wonderful part of my weekend. One day she got very ill, and the staff told me she was going to die. And I was very scared, and I started going every night, and I sat by her bedside, and she had congestive heart failure, and she was gurgling the death gurgle, and we thought she was gone. Every night I went, and she revived. She got better, and she was out of danger. And the staff thought it was a miracle, and so one night I said to her, well, I'll see you Saturday, and it was Tuesday. She goes, Saturday? Saturday's such a long time away. I've gotten used to seeing you every day. And I said, I felt really guilty. So I said, yeah, I'll come on Saturday. I'll come Thursday, I'm sorry. So Thursday night, after a hard day of work, I'm driving there to the nursing home, and I started to feel resentment. Resentment. I thought, I worked a hard day, and I don't want to come on Thursday night. And my guilt had led me to a position of resentment. And I didn't want to be there. And I got to her bedside, and I sat down, and I thought, now there's poison in a relationship which didn't have any poison in it. And I followed my own advice for a change. And I said to her, there's something I have to tell you. I didn't want to come tonight. I felt resentment on the way over. Whereas when I came on Saturday, I used to look forward to it. I loved it. And there was dead silence. I thought, oh my God, I hurt her feelings. This is terrible. And she takes this long sigh, and she says, I'm really sorry to hear that. It's such a long time waiting for you. And I live for when you come. And she said, but at least I'll know that when you come, that you enjoy me. that you're coming because you want to. Thank you very much for coming today.